When I started my company, Shortlist, I was doing literally everything. I was managing the design team, managing the development team, writing the stories, doing the sprint planning. Absolutely. If I didn't do something, it didn't get done. I don't think you need to do everything. I think you need to be willing to do everything. And the mindset shift that I think about is, especially as I've gotten more seasoned in my career, am I the best person to do this right now? And you can make that decision any number of ways. When you found a company or when you start a startup, that's 100% on you. When you go to these big tech companies and even sort of medium-sized tech companies, it's a little bit different. It becomes a lot more about resource management. It's non-digital tech. I think people are sleeping on satellites and space tech very much. I would venture to guess that most people, if you ask them how many satellites are in the air, they might guess like a few hundred. And that was right, until a few years ago. I think probably by the end of this year, there might be 10,000 satellites.
If you could instantly master one tech skill, what would it be?
Yeah, coding.
Hello everyone, welcome to TechFindsTech podcast. I'm your host Abdurrahman Salimi.
Today we have very wonderful guest, Ryan Borker. So, hi Ryan, how are you?
Hey, great. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. So before we dive into our main segment, can we get your introduction to our audience?
Absolutely. Right now, I'm running Apollo Street Company, which is a suite AI-based products in a number of areas based out of Japan. And before that, my career spanned a few startups. I was the first product manager at Gigster, which is an Andreessen company. I most recently was at Meta, leading part of their privacy products and infrastructure, and have had a bunch of different experiences across talent platforms and various future of work startups. Before that, I went to school at MIT for my grad school and was also starting my career at BCG, which is the Boston Consulting Group.
That's very wonderful to hear, Ryan. So Ryan, you have let's products at startups and big tech companies. What is one key mindset shift you have observed while build over the years while building products in that companies?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift that I've seen as a product manager is how user data is used, in particular in consumer. When I started my career, we were talking about lean startup and going and talking to customers. And that was still a relatively novel thing to do. Go and talk to your customers before you start building. And I think now we've, at least in consumer, come a little bit more full circle. You have all these tools to go and scrape Reddit and Twitter, and you can get the voices that are out there. You have just a lot of noise. And we saw this a lot at Instagram and Meta. We just had user study after user study. 1 million different people all want their features. But it's now a lot more about taste. You do want to validate your taste, make sure that it's not something that people are going to hate. But just going out and listening is much less interesting. I think that is different in enterprise, actually. I still think in enterprise, people still build to sales and sort of roadmaps in a way that's less helpful. So I would say in consumer, there's this big shift where I think taste is now going to become more and more important.
Are you a big advocate of get your product quickly into the hands of the people before actually building it fully at full scale or fully functional?
I think it depends. I think you want to prototype the key loop, and validate it in market some one way, shape, or form. The easiest way to validate it is someone already paying for a similar service and market. It's like if you have competitors, it's actually really good validation that you can go and launch, another website builder. It's not to say that yours is going to be better, but you don't need to go, hey, would you like to build websites? I think for truly novel concepts, that also is a little harder to validate because people may not be able to understand what you're building. I think there's this really interesting place in the middle where you're building something in a new way, where you're building something that has new technology or new potential that I do think you want to get in front of your customers as quickly as possible and kill your idea. You can even just test the messaging. You don't have to test the product at all. You can just test, hey, is this something that you would sign up for?
Yeah.
Because people, the top of funnel is
Yeah.
where people are getting bombarded today.
Got it. Got it. So moving to the next question, I mean, you have like gone from founding startups to work at big tech companies like Instagram and Facebook. So what are the key mindset or process shifts you observed while moving between these two worlds?
Yeah, they're night and day. When I started my company, Shortlist, I was doing literally everything. I was managing the design team, managing the development team, writing the stories, doing the sprint planning. Absolutely. Like if I didn't do something, it didn't get done. And when you found a company or when you start a startup, that's 100% on you. When you go to these big tech companies and even sort of medium-sized tech companies, it's a little bit different. It becomes a lot more about resource management. At the big tech companies, you have a UX researcher, you have content designer, you have design or designers, you have a bunch of engineers. And actually, in many instances, the engineers are graded on or their performance is based on how well they can execute independently. So your role shifts from being a player to much more of a coach and communicator, where you're getting different parts of the organization to align. I think they're very different skill sets. It's very rare to find people who can succeed in both roles. You tend to have a bias for one to the other. And even if these companies are saying, "Hey, you're entrepreneurial," we have these sort of entrepreneurial mindsets. It's just nothing could be further from the actual truth, right? You don't look at a budget. You don't look at any of these other things that matter as a matter of life and death when you're in sort of the startup world.
Definitely. And you mentioned one thing in the start that when you started your first startup or first company, you were doing everything like from managing to operations to tech. So is it like the universal truth that if you are starting a company, it should be in you? I believe it should be in you that you should be able to do everything, like from HR operations to managing tech and handling everything. Or is it like you have some sort of different experience back then?
Yeah, I don't think you need to do everything. I think you need to be willing to do everything. And the mindset shift that I think about is, am I, especially as I've gotten more seasoned in my career, am I the best person to do this right now? And you can make that decision any number of ways, right? If you're extremely budget constrained, you're ramen in college, you're going to have to do everything. You don't have the luxury of money or funding to go and have someone else do something. But even if you have the luxury, you may want to do some things yourself. In our startup, for example, we outsourced sales too early, and that was fatal to the company because the salesperson
Mm.
was unable to fully articulate and understand the vision. How could they, right? They had been hired on 3 months ago while we'd been working on the thing and talking
Yeah.
to, hundreds or thousands of customers. So you can make all these kinds of fatal mistakes. Really, I think what I've now heard, because I'm doing this just kind of for the second time, is that being able to act on signals a lot quicker is really what you want to get better at. You want to shorten your cycle time. If you hire a salesperson and it's not working out, figure that out in 2 weeks or a month, not in a year.
All right, got it. That definitely makes sense. Also, like you have worked with a client like Canon and you helped them build AI-powered platform called Race. So if we talk about in terms of AI, the AI hype is like here everyone is building products around AI or over AI. What do you think how AI is shaping the product and the development? Not just features, like why we design and deliver product, like using AI and the way we do it.
Yeah, it's early days. I spend my day thinking about this. Raise was a platform to help photographers understand what products were good. And it ended up getting shut down during the pandemic. I guess people weren't taking as many photos and traveling as much when everyone was locked in. But I think that was an early example of using deep domain knowledge, like what are the pixels in this photo versus the pixels in another, and getting professional photographers to critique each other's work, which was, I think, was an interesting use case at the time. I think AI means something totally different now. if you'd asked, what people were thinking about with AI in 2020, they were talking about computer vision. They were talking about, various machine learning, supervised, unsupervised, figuring out trends, not being able to talk to an intelligent, quote unquote. I don't think it's intelligent, but, people seem to think it's an intelligent thing in a box. And the biggest thing for me that I see is now you can connect different domains in at least a reasonable way. Not always, but in sort of a reasonable way, which is the new exciting part of the tech. You can give these AIs knowledge of your ERP or some transaction and some sort of rule set, and it can now automatically evaluate what to do. And so we at Gigster, for example, we're always talking about customer service automation, but it would always be like string matching. You'd have some sort of version of responses and string matching and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you'd say, okay, well, I think this is the best response, but it was sort of a glorified Elasticsearch, kind of thing. Whereas now you can really fine tune a model and have it answer most customer queries. When I'm in the development environment right now for N8N, for example, if I run into something, a developer is actually the slowest possible way to do it. I just ask the, assistant, and it has my context. It has, the docs preloaded. It has all of the responses, and it can give a response. And I think we are just at the beginning of understanding what kinds of situations that's going to be useful for.
Got it. And Ryan, like when computers were launched early back in 1970s or 80s, there were interfaces that people learned that helped them to operate computers. Right now, we are entering in an era where LLMs are becoming more our go-to platform for for our problems. We talk to LLMs. We try to provide them as much information as we could so that they have enough context to understand our problem and provide us an approach to solve the problem. Do you think that moving forward, prompt engineering or maybe LLM interface understanding is going to be the in-demand skill or must-have skill, or maybe something most valuable in a personality?
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. And I agree that in many instances, like you have a $500 million startup or whatever it is, Cluely, which is based on a prompt. I'm not sure it's Cluely, but there are a few of these, right? You go
Yeah,
and see they
yeah,
raise venture funding, and they're really just a wrapper on OpenAI with a really like well thought out prompt. That to me feels not very durable. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that won't work, but it feels very brittle
yeah,
as sort of a skill set. I do think understanding what you can and can't get and understanding how these models work is an unlock right now.
yeah,
If you go and, you hear all these stories, if you go threaten your LLM or offer it $1 million or say, hey, there's some people that are starving if you don't solve this problem, it genuinely creates better results.
yeah.
That's like not a feature, right? Like that's not how it should work, right? That just sucks right now, but that's just the way it is. So I think it's worth digging into right now, but my hope is that over time, the LLMs will get better at just parsing the input and creating more consistent responses. That actually may be a problem with the underlying tech. Actually, like if you go down to it, this might actually, I'm not thinking right now 6 months ahead, but I'm thinking like 3 years ahead. You might end up with situations that are more deterministic. Like you want your LLM to give you a high quality response every time. If it's just giving you garbage based on whether you tell it the weather or like threaten it, like that's not a great. That's a non durable experience. We're just so much in awe right now of what it can do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned Cluely. Uh, I remember like when I heard about them, and I can't even wrap my head around like how those dudes even got funding. I mean, what's the actual product here? And you have maybe you have noticed that recently they have pivoted now from like just a mere cheating tool. They have like transitioned into a product which is like helping people like through the interview and taking notes during the meeting. So they are slowly transitioning because they have eventually realized that just remaining in the cheating industry won't be a sustainable thing. So I kind of agree with your point here. You have worked in both consulting and the product leadership. So how did your strategy background and BCG shape how you have led teams today or how you have led in the past?
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back on that Cluely thing. I hadn't heard that, but that doesn't surprise me one bit, right? There's not the cheaters are probably going to be the people who want to pay you the least. It's almost a kind of circular truism or karma if you go that way. BCG was in many ways, I still think is in many ways, although it's going to be hard if you're not actually building the skills. One of the best places to start a career. You get exposure to very important problems that people are paying millions of dollars for someone else to solve. Your technical foundation is often in data, understanding the data that is generated from enterprises, and then building that into work product. There are so many things that you learn that if you don't go through that formative training, you don't learn anywhere else. Um, I found myself on a weekly basis building narratives with slides. And slideware and Excel and PowerPoints are not, the coolest tools around, but they're extremely effective for making points. And the way in which they do that is extremely powerful. I've used that throughout my career in many ways as I've learned how powerful that skill set was. Right. Like I didn't understand what I was doing. I was just like, oh, pump out another slide. Okay, here's another slide. Here's another slide. And now I think back and I was like, wow, that was the whole thing. Creating a narrative that people can follow along with and get excited about is 90% of work. And so you get very good at that if you're paying attention. I was not paying close attention. I was not paying close enough attention at BCG, but even, sticking my head in the sand, you gain a little bit of that skill set, which has served me very well.
Got it. So if there's any like technology or product like you believe in, but even if the hype isn't there,
Are you asking me a question?
yeah, so like can you share some sort of technology product that you really believe in, but hasn't even got the hype it deserves right now?
Tech that hasn't gotten the hype that it deserves. Man, tech gets so much hype. I don't know if there's like a technology right now that I think hasn't quite gotten the hype. I would say in general, if it's non-digital tech, I think people are sleeping on satellites and space tech
Oh,
very much. I would venture to guess that most people, if you ask them how many satellites are in the air, they might guess like a few hundred. And that was right, until a few years ago. I think probably by the end of this year, there might be 10,000 satellites. And the implications of having imaging and communication satellites that are circling the world is beyond most people's recognition right now. So I think people are sleeping on that a little bit. The market's woken up a little bit. You can see Rocket Lab stock doing pretty well. Firefly's about to IPO, but I think people are sleeping on space. I think in about 2 to 3 years, we'll be hearing about space like we're hearing about AI right now.
and just to like connect it with something, the way that Elon Musk is right now pushing Starlink technology, the satellite internet. Do you think that this internet thing and the satellite, like its relation to satellite, will carry on and will have a long-lasting impact?
Are you just talking about the connectivity?
Yeah, I'm just talking about the connectivity and the service being provided by the satellite internet. Is it going to be, will it be able to cope up with this fiber internet that we have in today in our houses?
Oh yeah, I mean, 5G NTN is there. I don't know how big the market is. I've kind of gone back and forth. I think it's actually much bigger than people are giving it credit for because you need this last mile for a lot of different things, and you might even use it for backup for data centers. There's some instances, for example, when we have drones in the air for military or non-military purposes, you can't just lose connection.
Yeah.
You have to have a backup, right? You can't have a drone, fall out of the sky. That's just not. No one's going to be cool with that. So I do think the connectivity is there. I think people are just sleeping on the imaging potential, right? You go from having one picture, once a day to having a refreshed picture every 30 seconds. you got a lot of people. There's more there than I think people are giving it credit for.
Got it. And Ryan, now we will change things a bit. We are moving to our next segment, which is called rapid fire questions. And the rule here is you cannot overthink the answer. So are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. So the first question I have is like, if you could instantly master one tech skill, what would it be?
Yeah, coding. I've tried a few times. I'm sort of a awful C coder, like a pretty okay HTML coder. But sort of beyond that, I can write some SQL queries. But if I were proficient in that, I'd be, I think, a lot more formidable as a founder.
All right. So, like, have you like tried this thing, like the coding, doing it yourself or using the GPT?
I've done a bunch of vibe coding. The results are very good if you know how to prompt it, but then something breaks and the debugging process is quite terrible and
Yeah.
in sort of unexpected ways. Right? Like I think the first thing I tried to vibe code was quite funny. I think I was trying to do a data analysis and it just kept
Mm.
on messing up the array input in Python. And I knew it was messing up the array input, but I didn't have enough wherewithal to go and fix it myself, like using Stack Overflow, multiple calls, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, fix this. And it was like, I fixed it. And, an hour later I kind of gave up because it kept on telling me it was BSing me. It told me that it was fixed and it was never fixed. So
Yeah.
you can't rely on these things too much.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just typical AI. It happens a lot with us as well. So moving to
Totally.
the next question, like if you had to build a startup tomorrow, in what space it would be?
Yeah, I'm building these right now. I think vibe coding products is like a good segment. I think it's like a very good segment. There are a lot of people that are going to want to build things, and you just help them build things. It's like the equivalent of a website builder. Is the most popular tool right now. It's a AI website builder, but there's a lot of tools like that that you can build that I think will be very popular.
And what's your favorite framework in your space or in your product stack?
My tech framework,
Like your favorite
like
framework or tool that you use daily in your domain?
right now, I like N8N a lot. N8N is super cool. Um, I'm using it for a lot of different things just to experiment. And in many ways, it can replace software, which is the most surprising thing for
Yeah.
me. Things that would have cost me, a few $1,000 or I don't know, whatever you want to call it, like a couple engineers, a couple of months to build. I can now, connect the different agents and sub workflows together with APIs and get a very interesting result. I think it's like only 85% mature. It still breaks more than it should. It's brittle, but like, I think the hype there is pretty real if you know what you're doing.
Okay, got it. And code, design, or data, which would you double down on today?
Oddly enough, design, I think that we haven't yet figured out. We can generate really cool stuff, but I think at the core of design is understanding how people best interact with the new AI, the new tools. We haven't figured that out yet at all. I think the idea that you're just kind of texting your chat GPT is cool and very general purpose, but in about 5 or 10 years, it'll look like the web forums of the like late 90s. It's like, oh, everyone was on a forum. Like, well, now it's an app, like apps are the way to go. Um, and I think my guess is there will be some shifts like that that happen.
All right. What's one piece of tech history you think every PM should know?
Oh man, tech history. What is a piece of tech history? I think I'm gonna go with looking at Steve Jobs' career as a little bit of an arc. I think you want to look, or even Elon Musk, if you look at these people that are truly visionaries, um,
Mm.
they've had large periods or chunks where they may not have been quote unquote failures in sort of the traditional sense because they had sort of initial success, but they've been kicked out of their own companies, or they've been fired as CEOs, and they've almost run out of money. Um, and I think it goes to show you, and I think it's maybe even harder to imagine from our side. If you haven't really been massively successful, I don't think either of us have, and most people haven't. It's hard to imagine, putting that all on the line and then
Yeah.
not succeeding, and then having to kind of reinvent yourself and be like, okay, well, I had $100 million, now I have zero. I'm going to go back and make a few $1 billion. There's something to be said about the ability to sort of continue pushing, get kicked down 100 times and get up 101, that I think everyone should be aware of. I think it's going to be hard, and I think that you don't need to immediately shift into the grind set. It's like, oh, I got to go do this every day, but you should be resilient for sure.
Right. What's the single best advice you have carried with you across the roles and challenges?
Yeah, pick your battles. I think it's, for me, is the best piece of advice generically. You're going to have, in many ways, it sort of subsumes prioritization, right? You have to prioritize the things that you're going to work on. And in many instances, you're going to have to fight with people to get it, you know, your way, or work on convincing them, or, whatever you want. And some things just aren't worth, some juice just is not worth the squeeze. And you're not going to get the thing that you want. And that's okay. Letting the process unfold, and even letting people fail, letting projects fail, and taking, 6 months of someone else's time, just, you have to be willing to do that in your career to then, have other people learn these things. And I think that's one thing that's been for me as a parent too. You have this instinct and urge to overcorrect everything that your kid's doing, and you're like, nope, nope, just let them touch the stove, and they'll
So,
figure it out.
all right, Ryan, that's it. Thank you so much. I believe that the piece of advice that you shared, like pick your battle, this is something that I will remember too. And it is something so valuable that and people even don't realize the value of this. Like, not every battle is worth fighting. So just pick your battles. And if you are picked, just stay consistent and fight it till last. And I'm pretty sure that the audience will definitely extract more key insights from the conversation we just had. And until then, I think so. Let's chase the future, build the impossible, and keep finding the tech that finds you. Thank you, Ryan, for your time.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me.